Hadok, welcome everyone. We're glad to have you join us today as we talk about climate change and the steps we need to take now and in the future to build climate resilience in our communities. My name is Michael Raigoza, and I'm a Program Officer for Cultural Projects at the Seventh Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples. I'm also Nomlaki, a people that have called Northern California home for thousands of years, and we take pride in being stewards of our traditional homelands. Our work at the Seventh Generation Fund, and for many Indigenous peoples like my own, is dedicated to maintaining and restoring the balance of Mother Earth, as our current paradigm of resource extraction for profits has led to degradation and overexploitation of our ecosystems. As the native saying goes, when the last tree has been cut down, the last fish caught, the last river poisoned, only then will we realize that one cannot eat money. And that rings true now more than ever as we continue to see global deforestation, freshwater and food insecurity, fishery collapses, and we stare down what scientists are calling the sixth mass extinction. We know that the climate has changed numerous times throughout our planet's long life. There have been periods of warming that gave rise to large flora and fauna, and cycles of cooling that developed into the Ice Age. The difference now, compared to previous climate changes, is the rate at which we are warming up the planet. It is estimated to be 200 times faster than previous cycles, which hinders life on this planet's ability to adapt with the climate over time. We changed the balance in our atmosphere in 200 years by drawing all of the carbon that has been stored beneath our feet to the surface in the form of oil, natural gas, and coal, and then burning it to fuel the world. Now we are facing the repercussions of this paradigm as we see rise in size and frequency of weather events, of extreme weather events, along with the continual rise in global temperatures. We are all aware of what is happening, but as I mentioned earlier, it is time for us to discuss climate solutions and build climate resiliency in our communities to be better prepared for these events. It's going to take large investments into our infrastructure, global and local collaborations across different groups, and then the hard work and determination from the people to disrupt the status quo in which these large extraction companies have set. I would like to touch on 2 points regarding our energy systems before I pass it to the far more esteemed panelists, Julia Bernal of Pueblo Action Alliance, and Christopher Peters, president of the Seventh Generation Fund. My story with energy sovereignty and energy systems started when I went to Humboldt State, where I received my bachelor's in environmental studies with an emphasis in renewable energy. Following that, I became a grant writer for my tribe, writing multiple federal grants to develop a microgrid on our reservation. And with this, I developed a much deeper understanding of our energy dynamics and the importance of energy sovereignty, not only in Native communities, but in all communities. Having a say or being a shareholder in how your energy is generated and transmitted is incredibly important as we move into the renewable energy age and we change our infrastructure. What is the point of having energy generation like a wind turbine or solar panels if you or your community don't have a vote in how it is managed? Native people in this country at the moment have a unique advantage when dealing with the issue due to our sovereignty, and it is incredibly important now more than ever that we exercise our sovereignty in the form of owning our own energy, not only for the benefit of Indian country, and indigenous peoples, but also to be the blueprint for other non-native communities as they transition away from large investor-owned utility companies into more decentralized power infrastructure. Developing microgrids and having a system in which we all can provide power back to the grid in a cheaper, we're not held hostage to these large companies that hike rates up whenever they may run into issues financially or they have to appeal to their shareholders is incredibly important. And the other point I'd like to make is that renewable energy, while it might be better for the atmosphere, it's also another form of resource extraction if we do not have any say in what's happening. If they come in and an outside company comes in and takes it and develops energy and sends it somewhere else without the local community benefiting from it, it is just another form of resource extraction. So I'd like, again, thank you for everyone joining me today and talking, and we'll have a Q&A discussion after the following 2 panelists speak, and then we'd love to open up for conversation and any questions you may have. So I'd like to pass the microphone, so to speak, to Julia Bernal from the Pueblo Action Alliance as she joins us today. So thank you.
Thank you, Rakem. Magima Van, hello, good afternoon or good morning. I'm not sure where everybody is situated today, but it's a pleasure to be here with you all. And of course, want to extend a lot of gratitude to Seventh Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples fun fact. They were our very first grant that we ever received for Pueblo Action Lines when we started 8 years ago. And so it's just always a pleasure and honor to, share space with a foundation that really believed in our work since the very beginning. So just wanting to raise my hands to this organization. But we were invited, to share some of our, I guess, some of our insight on the conversations around climate resiliency and adaptation and mitigation. And I think it is appropriate for Indigenous peoples to lead this conversation, because so much of the very needed and critical solutions are coming from Indigenous peoples globally. We've been involved with climate change advocacy, starting from like the very local level and reaching out to the international climate negotiations and that arena. And it has really galvanized the idea that Indigenous peoples globally share similar value systems that encompass reciprocity between the natural world and communities. And I wanted to just give a little bit of context of like where our climate work is really coming from, because our organization is in the state of New Mexico, and New Mexico is home for many of the Pueblo indigenous nations. We have 20 tribes, Pueblo native tribes, throughout the state of New Mexico and Texas, but 19 of those are in New Mexico. And New Mexico is situated in the southwest region of the occupied United States, and we live in very arid to semi-arid climates. Meaning, we have desert ecosystems, and so water is a very important resource that we have essentially like centered our cultural ways of life around, recognizing that water, as it comes in many forms, can appear at different times of the year. And so Pueblo people, we essentially have adopted a cultural calendar that goes by like our seasons. And so winter being a very crucial time for snowpack, and the best way to store water is when it's in the snow form, like, situated in the headwaters. And then, come spring becomes our surface water runoff, and that gets us ready for the irrigation system season that happens during the summer. And then coming to fall, we have like our fall harvest. And so Pueblo people, being that we've been here since time immemorial, have learned how to adapt to our climate, and have used many different types of land stewardship and just climate adaptation strategies since time immemorial. There was a point in history where we were more following buffalo herds, and until later on we decided to settle along the Rio Grande, and now we're thriving agricultural communities. So we really did learn how to work with the land in order for the land to provide the resources that we needed in order to not just survive, but accomplish thriving economies. And I know that there's like a very robust conversation that connects the impacts of colonization to climate change. But I wanted to provide an example coming from one of our very prominent and esteemed, and he's passed on now, but one of our very pristine historians, Pueblo historians, Joe Sandia, who comes from Jemez Pueblo, who did a lot of writing and research on the impacts of Spanish colonization in our area, which ultimately led to this moment of resistance and revolution, the 1680 Pueblo Revolt, But during the peak of Spanish colonization, we were really starting to see the impacts to to the natural environment by way of this new economic system that the Spanish brought with them as they began to settle in our area. And he writes about how we never really experienced any sort of impacts when it came to water storage or soil erosion, and those types of problems came into our territories once the Spanish began overtaxing and exploiting labor from directly from our communities, overgrazing lands that caused a lot of soil erosion. And that was really like the first time that we were starting to feel like those types of impacts. And so I found that to be a very important example of how economic systems really do have adverse impacts to the natural environment and the lived environment as well. And so now we're seeing it a bit more exacerbated because of the over extraction of fossil fuels. And of course, we know that this is also by way of human impact. And so the global capitalist economic system that over extracts resources is ultimately what is causing climate crisis. And so knowing all of that, and I think that is a very widely shared opinion of those that know that climate change is actually a real thing, is that the solutions that we are going to need to adopt and ultimately lead us into a just transition really do come from, again, indigenous land-based communities and nations. And a lot of that isn't because of the ways in which we're building out infrastructure, or it isn't about geoengineering our way out of the climate crisis, but it really is about shifting a paradigm into a more values-based system. I mean, some could argue that global capitalism has certain values like over extraction or using finite resources to achieve infinite economic gain. But I think the value systems that we're speaking to really are coming from the original instructions that were gifted to Indigenous peoples upon creation. And so some of those, simply are love, care, respect, reciprocity with the natural world. Centering culture and traditional ways of life rather than getting sucked into sort of what the dominant paradigm calls like hustle culture, or work hard, and you work really hard and you very rarely have time for rest. But anyways, these values that we want to essentially become part of that dominant paradigm are really going to be those it's really going to be the foundation for creating real climate solutions, because there isn't going to be a one size fits all solution. As you know, like, we all come from different geographies, we all come from different cultures. And so one thing that we as an organization, as Pueblo Action Alliance, is really trying to forward is that we have to ultimately lead climate mitigation and adaptation strategies from the people that know that land the best. And so I'll just sort of end by saying that so much of the impacts and injustices that we're experiencing now really do have to are really from a lot of these managerial mistakes that were made before us. And so I think ultimately it is really important to recognize that the decisions that we make now are ultimately going to impact the future. And so remembering who we are, where we come from, and then if you're non-Indigenous, learning those types of values from the people of which the land you occupy from can ultimately help us make those important decisions. And so that way future generations aren't having to inherit a lot of the issues that we're experiencing today. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. I forgot to mention in the beginning, there is a chat. So if you have any questions for the Q&A section or any questions for the panelists following this, start to put them in the chat and we will get to them after this. And so up next, we have Mr. Christopher Peters, the president of Seventh Generation Fund.
Good morning, Skoyenakoi. My name is Chris Peters. I'm Puhlik-lah, or Yurok and Karuk Indian from Northern California. I'm also the president of the Seventh Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, the oldest Native American public foundation in the United States and perhaps the world. We've been assisting Native peoples, communities, and Native nations rebuild healthy and culturally vibrant communities for over 47 years. We also support projects that are opposed to climate change or projects that are building a better world for Indigenous peoples to live in, a climate resilient world, such as Standing Rock Sioux Tribe in North Dakota, or SAGE Development Corporation, the true meaning of just transition. And as Julian Michael says, putting it in the hands of Indian people require or guided by a philosophy, a tradition that is guaranteed to build a better community. We're founded upon a philosophical precept that is held by most people of the world, Indigenous peoples of the world, that in each of our conversations, in each of our thought and deliberation, we consider the impact on 7 generations to come. And I think that's an important one. This precept teaches us how to be good ancestors. And it's germane for our conversation today, building a climate resilient world. I'm pleased to be a part of this panel. I've always respected Julian and Michael. Both have been involved in this issue for many years, and both have made some very astute observations about climate change, climate resilience, and a changing world. You know, by force or by choice, the American public and perhaps the world will be thinking like and acting like Indigenous peoples sooner or later. By force, if we continue on the path that we're moving now, and largely it is motivated by capitalism, we'll hit a brick wall. We'll come to a stop and people will be forced to make a change in thinking and behavior and start be acting like more Indigenous people. Or by choice, they will immediately, in the near future, consciously make a decision that will require change to be happening. And we believe by force or by choice, because we believe the world or the government won't solve climate change on their own. Solving the greatest crisis in the history of our species require action at a scale and speed that can only be achieved through unprecedented partnership between the general public, private enterprise, and civil society, a partnership that mobilizes necessary funds, that establishes climate change or climate warming of the planet as a priority, and creates a voice within the American society that shouts out a public outcry in a monumental way. It is our convictions and that of our partners that society needs to change at a level far deeper than most people realize. Solar panels, electric cars, and carbon taxes get nowhere close to addressing the underlying cause of our complex social and environmental challenge, that of global warming or climate change. The interconnection of the world's biggest problem requires a paradigm shift, a social transformation like we've never seen before of our society and its economic organization. And I point to capitalism as primarily the cause. That is guided by a change in values, a necessary change in values, and a necessary change in worldview. We must do this in the near future. A report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change indicates time is running short. Time is running short. We only have a few decades to make a difference. And some people believe that it's too late already. The Elders Council that we are advised by suggests that it's now time to prepare for a climate change happening. And with the change in administration of the US government, this process has been set back at least 4 years. Well, the Earth's climate has changed throughout history. The current warming is happening at a rate not seen in the past 10,000 years. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, since systematic scientific assessments began in the 1970s, the influence of human activity on the warming of the climate system has evolved from a discussion or theory to an established fact. Human activities is causing climate change. Human activity. The scientific information taken from natural sources, such as ice cores, rocks, tree rings, and from modern equipment like satellites and other instruments, will show the signs of a changing climate. Ice cores drawn from Greenland, Antarctic, mountain glaciers shows the Earth climate changes is negatively responding to greenhouse gases at an unprecedented rate. Evidence reveals that current warming occurs roughly at 10 times faster than the average rate of warming since the ice change. Carbon dioxide from human activities is increasing 250 times faster since the ice age. Just look at the signs. The ice is melting, folks. The ice is melting. Glaciers are retreating almost everywhere around the world, including the Alps, Himalayas, Andes, Rockies, Alaska, and Africa. Just look at the signs. Species migrations to the north are happening as we speak. Sea levels have rose 8 inches in the last century. This rate in the last 2 decades, however, is nearly double that of the last century, accelerating slightly every year. Despite that, the ocean is warming. The planet's average surface temperature has risen 2 degrees Fahrenheit since the 19th century. The change is driven largely by an increase in carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere, again by human activities. Most of this warming has occurred in the past 40 years, with the 7 years between 2016 and 2017 were tied for the warmest years on record. In the past 4 years, 2020 to 2024, the Earth is getting even warmer and is breaking all kinds of records. The number of records, high temperature events in the United States has increased, while the number of low temperature events have decreased since the 1950s. The US has witnessed an increased number of intensive weather events, winds, hurricanes, rainfalls, snow, etc. I mean, you just name the incidents of weather events that have occurred in the last 10 years. Just look at the signs. We're here. We know. Changes to this course, we need everybody's help. Despite who is in the White House, we need to strengthen climate policies across all levels of government in the United States. For this, we need your help. Talk to your elected representatives and have them promote climate adaptation measures. We need to aggressively promote adaptation measures. The big one, we need to clean up the transportation sector. You know, the number of cars on the highways is incredible. We need to look at mass transition, make our homes healthier and safer, watch our investments. What we're investing in climate-friendly stocks, just transition, as Michael and Julia stressed, Indians can do it better. Build more sustainable food and agricultural systems. Smaller farms are much better than supporting mega agribusiness. The last, we need to get cars off city streets. and we need your help to do this. So I'll return that back to Michael.
I think you touched on a good point right there, Chris, at the end with the importance of food security, as well as moving back to like working with the soil and growing your own food, because we have this culture of monocrop, and that once one fails, we're going to have a very dire need for food. And like that's the other thing of getting back to local, knowing your farmer, knowing where your food comes from, getting in touch with working and providing for yourself a little bit will not only get you more in touch with your surrounding environment, knowing what native plants, knowing what food grows better in an area, but also gets you food security, which is going to be a very important issue moving forward. As I think, as Chris was saying, we're going to have different climates at different latitudes that we haven't seen before and we're not adjusted for. And so we're going to need to be able to really have a more diverse food system moving forward. I don't know if either of the panelists have anything they would like to say on that. Okay, here we go. What can renters do to combat big utilities?
Well, we need to look at just transition. We need to put the hands in minority people who understand what is happening clearly and make the investments that are necessary at this point to a just transition, to have more local, more sustainable alternative energy systems established. We need to do this quickly.
Also, with big utilities, it's tough because, like I was saying before, there's a monopoly right now. So in Northern California and most of the California state, we deal with a company called Pacific Gas and Electric. And when they get hit with issues of being sued because they've started wildfires in our state, they then hold the consumer hostage and they pass that rate hike to the consumer, right? And so really, like I was saying, getting involved and we have a system called the California Public Utilities Commission. And it's really important that we make them do their jobs, and they hold these large investor-owned utilities to their feet to the fire, so to speak. Like they need to do their job, and we need to start promoting that the people, that capitalism that we're talking about, that the consumer doesn't get dealt with all these interest hikes for a monopoly or for shareholders' profit. Like we're saying, this is about people. This isn't about profits. This isn't changing the paradigm so that people can afford and live in more energy, renewable energy, more clean energy without having the prices skyrocket where it becomes unaffordable. I don't know if Julia has anything on that, but.
Yeah, well, I'm seeing a lot of comments in the Q&A that are referencing the new administration we're going to be stepping in 2025. And I think one thing that I want to maybe share with folks is that my community of Sandia, Pueblo, we really do value and cherish this concept of like community. And that ultimately has led us to create a regenerative local economy, really. And that can exist outside of what is happening, in the political landscape. And I say this because I think so much of the climate advocacy is really nested in like policy change, but we all know that like policy can get adopted in one administration and then totally gutted and rolled out in the next. And so, but that doesn't always happen when you're a part of a community-based economy, because it allows you to think about the needs of that particular group of people. And so even to the point around like what can renters do to combat big utilities, there's a lot of different things, but it really depends on what that localized community is really thinking towards. I've seen examples of folks creating land trusts or community trusts where they are able to put like housing into like a nonprofit structure that is outside of, like a landlord type of a relationship that you could have with like an energy grid. Here in New Mexico, Pecos Pueblo has its own solar grid that is separate from the bigger utility here in New Mexico, and is actually providing not only energy to the Pueblo community, the tribe there, but is providing electricity to the surrounding community in that area. And so I really do feel like we're at this moment where we've seen how globalized capitalism really does separate us from where that resource is originally coming from. And so if we're able to come back to more smaller, localized economies, we might have a better ability to manage our food systems, our energy grid, our water systems, because it's coming from like a community-based lens. And so, yeah, that's what I'll offer there. Thanks. And then there was another question on like your favorite ecological thinker. I would recommend Dr. Greg Cajete, who wrote a book called Native Science. And one section in that book that I found really interesting was about the uses of natural resources. And, we see now in this current paradigm, the overuse of natural resources, not to meet the needs of communities, but to meet the needs of the market. And so a lot of waste and surplus is created out of that type of system. And so, there's a gap in between that. Like we need to use resources that are provided by the natural world, but we have to use them in the way that meets community needs, and that also allows the natural world and that system to regenerate itself too. So I'll just stop there.
That's a great segue into this next question from Arthur. How can Indigenous peoples introduce their worldviews and values into local public schools so the children can learn your wisdom appropriate to their own environment? I don't know if...
Yeah, I think the by force or by choice, is the underlining concepts. By force, they're going to be forced into making the changes that are necessary, thinking and behaving like Indigenous people. Or, by choice, they will make an intellectual, conscious decision to make a change immediately. And I think that is paramount in my mind of how Indigenous thinking is going to percolate up. Certainly more curriculum development, curriculum change needs to happen in our school systems. Our school systems need to change. Our economy that is based on capitalism needs to change. A lot of things need to change in our society that will make it a better place to live.
Yeah, I also think introducing this idea of that and really talking and discussing that we are part of the ecosystem and we do not dominate the ecosystem. And that whatever we do to it ultimately reflects onto us, and really having, like we keep talking about, this paradigm shift, but really introducing kids to science and the idea of like interacting with their environments and realizing that we are not in control of everything. We are stewards. We are the caretakers. We are not the dominant species. And that's really changing that idea and starting that at a young age. I think children really understand that when they look around and see other people. It's as we grow up, we start to think that we need to control everything, but we need to be integrated more into our ecosystems. The next question is, so there's a question, what projects are funded by the Seventh Generation Fund around the world? I'd invite you to visit our website, Seventh Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, and I would be happy to message you the link after that. This next one is, thank you for the amazing discussion. If the main shift is to activate the local communities, what should the federal government's role be in supporting that? And I would start off with say, investments. Send money to these communities that are on like the front line, so to say, of climate change, the marginalized communities, and really start. The previous administration, their current administration, really tried to invest a lot of money as they started that bill, and we need to continue that and really make sure our vote counts, and start investing money into this climate infrastructure.
And no matter who's in the White House, we need to mobilize people. We need to get out on the streets and wave our banners that climate change is happening currently, now. People need to look at signs.
Also, I feel like too, it's important that we continue to train and keep our emergency organizations intact and really keep those funded and be ready to mobilize and have everybody trained for, I mean, whatever you feel about FEMA is incredibly important when a weather event comes in, an extreme weather event. Having people that have been trained in climate, like extreme weather events and climate action, and being able to mobilize them is going to be important moving forward.
Yeah, I'll just also add on to that in terms of like ways in which federal assistance can help some of on the ground work is that for example, in New Mexico, there was a really horrible wildland fire that happened in northern New Mexico. There was the Hermit Peaks and Calf Canyon fire. And while there was emergency FEMA funding to help with on the ground fire mitigation, a lot of that funding was really hard for communities to access. And so I think one way that is really necessary in order for those types of funding streams to work is that the relationships that the federal government needs to build with local communities, especially Indigenous communities, because of the mistrust and just the historic atrocities that the federal government has inflicted upon Indigenous peoples, really needs to happen because a lot of times there are these, monumental policies passed to help communities make that transition from non-renewable energies to renewable energies, or provide infrastructure grants or whatever the funding source is that the federal government needs to remember that communities are very diverse, and a lot of the times it is difficult to access a lot of this funding, especially when you're working with like farmers who maybe aren't always experienced in filling out like the dozens of pages of paperwork, in order to get a little bit of funding to help like a water infrastructure project or to remediate an area of land that's been impacted by fire. So I think that in that similar vein too, we, like local communities, Indigenous communities, we have the answers, and we also have the resources in order to address the impacts that we have. But I think again that a shift in thinking also needs to happen too.
I think the drill baby drill concept is got to change. We are dependent on fossil fuels, and we need to get off that boat. And it's not, gas and oil is not God sent. I mean, that's been voiced here lately. I mean, that's crazy. That's crazy talking. Gas and oil is the lifeblood of the world, and we need to keep it intact, and we need to keep it there. We need to oppose any drilling and opening of Bears Ear, for example, and other places that have been protected by national parks over the years, and oppose aggressively that attempt to drill gas and oil.
Yeah, and just to add on that too, like I think there was also, I think Michael mentioned like investments, but an important aspect of that too is the divestment of certain programs that needs to happen in this country, and fossil fuels is one of them, because the narrative that I think the United States particularly has been pushing even since like the Nixon administration is that we have to like sever our oil and gas dependence from the Middle East, and it needs to come domestically. But at the same time, there's this like narrative that puts us in this position of like scarcity mode when there are more than enough resources to meet the needs of people right now, and we're misusing those resources to appease a completely made up market system, and it doesn't it doesn't encapsulate what communities are really needing, at this point. I think like one story that I was told from an elder in my community is that and it's a great example of like using resources in a reciprocal way, is that before a lot of our tribes were electrified, a lot of the power like for heating and light was coming from fire, and a lot of the firewood was taken from our riparian forest, and that also decreased the fuel load in that forest, which is a fire mitigation strategy. So to me, that's just an example of how utilizing a resource that could also benefit the natural ecosystem and the community are those types of solutions that we should be going towards. And not to say that we have to go back in time and only, power our homes by using fire or, whatever. I'm saying that the concept of reciprocity in how we're going to change our energy use in the future is something that we should include, because that ultimately that just ultimately shows that there are ways for us to meet the needs of our communities without over extracting or over exploiting resources and labor.
Yep, that's a great point. And then kind of back to what Chris was saying about the Bears Ear Monument. And when we're talking about building infrastructure, I don't mean going and building in a whole new spot. It's kind of reinventing the current infrastructure we have while also maintaining conservation efforts, because we need to allow the planet to do its biological processes that bring carbon out of the atmosphere and really promote that as well. So when we're talking about investing in new infrastructure, it's really just enhancing the current infrastructure we have without expanding it to different areas and, reducing conservation efforts. Those need to go hand in hand. And then two, when we're transitioning, a lot of people want to make the argument, and I'm sure it comes from big oil, is that it's got to be one or the other, that you can't have both. But in reality, we're going to have to diversify our energy and have the ability to do multiple things, because sometimes the sun isn't always shining or sometimes the wind isn't blowing. And then also going into battery storage as well, which is another issue I'm sure Chris and Will can touch on, is the importance of not over extracting lithium. Like, that's going to be the new age extraction, right, moving forward for all of these batteries that people want to promote. So we need to be really conscious of how much lithium and how we take that and how we use it, and not to exploit people who may be dealing with lithium mines or so forth. Are there suggested techniques to convince politicians? Was one question from Susan. I don't know.
Well, that's right now the current administration is heavily drill baby drill. But I don't think we can give up. This issue is paramount. It's something that we need to be focused on aggressively. And I think the changing the minds of existing people is public outcry. We need to look at more voices, more people talking about climate change, the warming of the world, and do it a little more aggressively.
Yeah, that's I think we all kind of chuckled, because I think that's what we're all still trying to figure out, like what's our most effective strategy. And just as a caveat, I myself am not a reformist, and so I have a lot of very critical critiques on the system as it is now. But one thing I will say is that I really do believe that people power is an important way to shift thinking. I look at the mass mobilization that has happened in response to the genocide happening in Palestine, and that public display of people aligning on a particular issue is incredibly powerful, and can eventually lead to some action, whether that comes from like a policy perspective or whatnot. But building community, building relationships, that is very core to seeing change happen.
Yep, I agree. I think also we want to convince, like you're saying, convince politicians, but it's also leading by example and practicing what we preach and really going out and doing the things that we trying to convince other people to do, because that being the example, and when somebody else sees you interacting in a way with your community, it'll really kind of galvanize and kind of promote and inspire other people. So getting out and practicing what you preach, I think, is also important. Um, so I have another question here. We have had success framing environmental and sustainability projects in other states as creating jobs or economy building. So we can still get support in conservative states. Have you seen this be successful by reframing the conversation to fit both sides of the aisle?
I think reframing the question is important. We're not talking here about changing everybody's thinking all at once, where it's a gradual basis. If it doesn't happen in this administration, I think the galvanizing community support will come in handy during the next administration. Granted, we don't have much time. I think we don't have much time to make a difference. And I think that's clearly indicated throughout all of the people advising on climate change, is that we don't have much time.
Yeah, to that question, and I'll give like a more localized government answer, is that one of the issues that we see New Mexicans really care about is like water. And that reaches both sides of the aisle, definitely, because so much of the agricultural sector depends on water. In New Mexico, there's a lot of traditional and small scale sustainability farming that happens. And so I think that this might be the political moment to start organizing policy efforts that are of concern of both sides, and to really, again, lean into value systems rather than, picking like the left agenda over the right. We've seen, like in this past election, how divisive such a polarizing campaign trail really did to our communities. I mean, I can say that the communities I come from, there were like a lot of Democratic votes, but there was also a lot of conservative votes as well. And if I'm trying to mobilize our communities, I don't want this system to continue to divide us. And so I'm more on the tip of, let's organize and align on our value systems, rather than like what our political positionality is, recognizing that a lot of the times people's political positionality has to do with the material conditions that they're living in as well. And so recognizing that that this ultimately is a way to divide us, we can try to move past that and gain support regardless of what your whether you're like red or blue. So I'm there.
Finding commonality and promoting unity, I think, is incredibly important moving forward. So I definitely agree with that. We're going to do our conclusions now with each of our panelists as we start to end this webinar. So I'm going to offer it to Julia, if you'd like to do your closing statements.
Sure. Yeah. Well, again, thank you for the conversation, and want to thank all of those that attended the webinar and asked some really thought-provoking questions, because ultimately we want to bring our community along with us and learn from our community on how to promote and generate real climate solutions that meet the needs of our community. And so I think, like, for me in this work, things that I've really learned over my short time as an organizer and as the executive director of this organization is that we have to meet people where they're at. And a lot of the times we can get caught up, and especially I'm talking about like a lot of like the nonprofit kind of world, is that we can get caught up in like that type of jargon, and it at times can exclude people from coming along with us on creating solutions. And so I would just try to encourage others to really think about where are our people at when it comes to climate change? Where are our people at on thinking about how we're going to build more regenerative economies that, again, like meet the needs of our people, but also strengthen our communities and allow us to be within an ecosystem that upholds those value systems that we've talked about so much over this webinar. Because there isn't really any other way, I guess, to like Chris's point, we're either going to be forced by it or find it. And something that even my own godfather had said is that, you know, we have had several different types of climate adaptation strategies. Migration and moving has been one. A lot of the times for tribes, because we're within like reservation boundaries, don't have that option to really move from our original places. We can adapt or die. You know, is something that he always said too. And I don't think that, you know, we want to you know, end like our existence as human. And so we are going to really have to think about what those types of adaptation strategies are. And if that's allowing the natural world, Mother Earth, to adapt on her own, and we like follow in her footsteps, then maybe that's the approach that we take. That could ultimately mean that our culture might shift. Our traditional calendars might shift as well. Our growing seasons might also shift, but ultimately we have to work with the natural world that we were gifted to be on. And again, there's just so much that we can learn from the natural world. That's what our ancestors did. That's what the animals have taught us. And so remembering that that legacy will, I think, ultimately help us move in the right direction. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Now, Christopher Peters.
Thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. It's been fantastic. I think it's a topic that needs to be talked about more and more by the American public. You know, I think the by force or by choice is a good concept to think about. You know, we will be forced into making the change, or we can do the change intellectually and consciously before it happens. All of the United Nations, the United States government, and the state of California, in establishing climate change, they advise us strongly to lean toward indigenous thinking. Having indigenous peoples participate in those committees are essential. Having our input into the discussion itself is critical. You know, nothing about us without us is our slogan. You know, and I think it is germane for the concept here of climate change. You know, we need to have input on it. We need to be aggressive about it, and only us can make a difference. You know, I think a lot of scientific analysis, a lot of good thinking people haven't been able to move the budget, haven't been able to move the needle at all. You know, that we need to have our value systems. We need to have the concepts that we hold close to our heart integrated into the climate change process. And to do that, we need to be aggressive about it.
Thank you, Chris. So I'd like to end the webinar. So I'd like to thank International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. Thank you for hosting this webinar, Audrey and Todd and the whole team. We really appreciate you. Julia, thank you again for joining us. Chris, as always. I'd just like to end this with talking about unity again, right? We're all in this together. Whatever's going to happen to this planet, we're all going to feel the effects of it. So it's very important for us now more than ever in this pivotal time in human history to really come together and work with each other. And like I said before, these global and local collaborations are going to be incredibly important. And if you do want to promote Indigenous values, I would ask you to, again, be a steward of your environment. Take care of your home. Take care of each other. It's really, we're in this together. And so go understand your local environment. Go make sure that you talk to your local politicians and you have a say in what's going on in your community, because really it's going to start everyone at a grassroots small scale to enact a large change. And that'll force politicians, like we were saying, to do something because of the public outcry. So thank you everyone for joining this webinar. I really appreciate it. And like I said, go be together, go join Unity. So thank you very much. And thank you again, Todd and the team and Audrey. We appreciate you.